Okay, good morning. My name is Jeonany Refutation, and I'm going to do my refutation speech on the claim of fact that seatbelt laws are unconstitutional. The speaker's first secondary claim was that primary seatbelt laws are a violation of the 14th Amendment. The second secondary claim was that they're also a violation of the 4th Amendment. And his third secondary claim was that mandatory seatbelt laws are being used to violate constitutional rights of African Americans in Florida. So my response to his first secondary claim that seatbelt laws are a violation of the 14th Amendment, the speaker he used the case of the People versus Corrig. And he also on the 14th Amendment, Section 1 states that no state shall deprive any citizen of life, liberty, or property without due process. And then the speaker, when he mentioned People versus Corrig, he said that the court found violating privacy was only justified by a compelling state interest. So I looked more into the case. The court, and this is according to this case itself, says the court stated that preventing and reducing injuries and the societal costs associated with them are valid state interests, and thus a valid exercise of the state's police power. I found this on the website of the Connecticut General Assembly under the Office of Legislative Research. Many court cases were about seatbelt laws being unconstitutional in states of like Illinois, Iowa, New Jersey, North Carolina, and Montana, and all of them were found constitutional by the court decisions. This too was found on the website of Office of Legislative Research. Some of those cases were the state of Montana versus Fulda, North Carolina versus Fazekas. And on to his secondary claim was that they also violate the 4th Amendment. The 4th Amendment is the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. A case that was in Texas, Atwater versus the city of Lago Vista. Basically, it was a mother driving with her children in her truck, and one of her kids dropped something, so she allowed them to unbuckle, and a police officer happened to pass by and saw that they were unbuckled, so he pulled her over and fined her. She took this to court because he basically arrested her in front of the children, and she claimed it scared the children. But the case ended with the U.S. Supreme Court decision that a person's 4th Amendment rights are not violated when being pulled over or ticketed for not wearing a seatbelt. And I found this on the website of Cornell University Law School. And seatbelt laws do not interfere with our fundamental rights, like the right to vote, travel, go to court. Thus, driving without a seatbelt is not a fundamental right. And the right to travel is a fundamental right, but the privilege to drive is given when you're licensed and follow the rules. Basically, driving is a privilege, not a right. So most roads are owned by the state, so the states have the right to put rules, and if you break those rules, such as wearing seatbelts and traffic lights and all that, you can be fined. I'm sorry. Also, in 1999, the Ninth Circuit of the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that there is no fundamental right to drive, and this was the case against the California DMV. And then for my third response to his secondary claim number 3, that mandatory seatbelt laws are being used to violate the constitutional rights of African Americans in Florida. So this is the case in many other states besides Florida, such as Illinois, but this isn't This has happened in all states. On research done in the city of Savannah, Georgia, a couple of researchers went on rides with police officers to see evaluate the traffic stops. 71% of the traffic stops involved minorities, Hispanics, African Americans. 66% of the reasons of the stop was for a traffic violation, looking nervous or looking suspicious, and only 6% was because of the person's appearance. And I found this on the National Institute of Justice website. And to conclude, once again, the speaker's claim of fact was that seatbelt laws are unconstitutional, and I refuted his 3 claims that they violate the 14th Amendment, the 4th Amendment, and that seatbelt laws are being used to violate constitutional rights of African Americans in Florida. And thank you for listening.
All right, the structural stuff is all fine. You organize your material following the structure of the advocate's claim pretty clearly. I thought on the first point you did a very good job suggesting why there is reason to believe that it is perfectly legitimate under the Constitution to enforce these laws. You've got a Supreme Court ruling on this. You've got a variety of cases in other states that have ruled on this issue. The notion that the courts have ruled on this, I think, is probably the standard that we ought to be using. In other words, I think there's one thing that's missing from this argument, and that is, what is the standard that the advocate uses versus what is the standard that I'm using? Well, the advocate has an interpretation of what the advocate thinks the 14th Amendment means, and I'm using the standard that the courts in Illinois, Iowa, New Jersey, and Connecticut all said, and what the U.S. Supreme Court said. And so I think the conclusions that are arrived at by the judiciary are probably much more reasonable than the conclusions arrived at by the advocate in this particular situation. I think that's you've got the right evidence. You just need to make your conclusion a little bit more firmly there at the end of that particular point. The same thing with the Fourth Amendment case. I think that you've got a good example. You've got a case that you cite. You give us some details on it. There's a court ruling on it. You're citing a law school publication to indicate that this is the way that it's perceived. There are court cases that deal with whether or not a right to driving exists. And you've also got an explanation about how the roads are public. There is a substantial public interest involved in these things. I think that you do a good job addressing all of the reservations that the advocate had on those particular points, and doing so with some good court cases to illustrate those particular points. On the third point, I think your argument's not quite as clear, because it sounds to me like the cops are pulling over every black guy in the city, for whatever reason. 71% of their stops are people who are in, are ethnic minorities, and 66% because they look suspicious. If what happens then is that they use the seatbelt law to justify their pulling folks over, then I think the advocate has a legitimate point on this particular argument. But you do have an argument that suggests that only 6% are addressing that particular issue. I think that's the information that you want to emphasize on that point. To me, I think maybe the better argument would have been to focus on this point from both the advocate's point of view and then the refutation. Are these laws being abused in some way as a way of justifying that, as opposed to whether or not they're constitutional or not? I think the question of whether or not an abuse is occurring is probably a stronger argument, and it would be maybe a more invigorating debate on this particular point. All right. And you know, you're kind of a quiet guy and everything, but you need to be a little bit more assertive in making your claims and use some declarative statements a little bit more. Your explanations are all great, and the research I thought was really solid. All right, thank you.